Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Marco Mendoza, and I serve as an assistant director within the Office of Financial Aid here at CSUF. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all throughout this next hour. We'll be presenting on the California Dream Act and FAFSA application for the upcoming 2023-2024 academic year. And at the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to take any questions. I believe the presentation should be somewhere between 25 or so minutes. And then the rest of the time, we can definitely take your questions on the application or just general questions. If they're really specific to your case, your questions, I would just ask that you please contact our office at a later time so we can look into your specific account. But if you're all ready, I'm going to go ahead and start with our presentation here and give you a quick overview of what you can expect. And we'll go over where and why students should be applying for financial aid, as well as step-by-step instructions on how to complete the California Dream Act, which we will be referring to as the CDA, or the FAFSA applications, as well as other important deadlines and general information. And before we get started, I also want to take some time to go over some commonly used terms that you'll see listed throughout this workshop. The first is CDA. And this for us stands for the California Dream Act application. Perhaps on other websites and other schools, you might see it referred to as something else. But if you see the term CDA, it refers to the California Dream Act application. And the term FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And this is the more common application that students submit. But we'll go into the specifics on who can submit the application, as well as who should be submitting the CDA. Next is COA, which stands for cost of attendance, EFC, which stands for expected family contribution, and lastly, FWS, which stands for federal work study. Now, when applying for financial aid, it's important to know that before we can get to the step of awarding students funds, we have to start with getting students, and more specifically you all, to submit your California Dream Act or your FAFSA applications. When students submit their FAFSA or Dream Act applications, it allows our department here at CSUF to receive that information and determine whether or not we need to request any additional information from you. This additional information can come in the form of some tax documentation, or perhaps a form that lets us know more information about your household size or your parents' household size. And this is really just to determine what is your maximum grant or loan eligibility. So this isn't for us to necessarily try to, doubt the information that's on your application, but just to verify what your maximum eligibility is for financial aid here at CSUF. And once we have both your Dream Act or your FAFSA and any requested documents that we post on your student's homepage, we then are able to award you all financial aid. And this can be a combination of grants, loans, or both. Now, why do you need to apply? It's really important that students consider the different deadlines that we have that we call priority deadlines. And we have two different statuses for priority. We have priority 1, which is a student that submits either their California Dream Act or their FAFSA by March 2nd, or and who additionally submits any documents that are requested on your student homepage by the priority deadline in April. And that priority deadline will be April 27th. Of this year. And if you're looking at this, the FAFSA and Dream Act deadline, it's coming up. You still have a few weeks left, but we want to encourage students to submit them now while they're still considered early applicants. And then priority 2 applicants are students who submit either the CDA or FAFSA after March 2nd, or who submit any documents that are requested after the priority deadline in April. And it's really important to distinguish both priority 1 and priority 2, because when you're a priority 1 student, you're being considered for the maximum amount of financial aid possible, which include things like the state university grant. And whereas priority 2 applicants are disqualified from the state university grant, which can go towards paying the tuition portion of your tuition fees and campus fees. So again, the main distinction is that priority 1 applicants submit everything on time, whereas priority 2 applicants submit something late and are disqualifying themselves from being considered for the state university grant. Now, which application should you be submitting? If you are a U.S. citizen, eligible non-citizen, in this category, they look into things like legal permanent residence, and a few other different distinctions. If you have a valid social security number, a valid high school diploma or GED, you should be submitting the FAFSA application. But if you live in California and meet AB 540 eligibility requirements, you have a U visa or TPS status, you should be submitting the California Dream Act, the CDA. Now, this is a application that is typically submitted by our undocumented student population. And so we want to make sure that we distinguish which applications you should be submitting, because we do cover both throughout this presentation. But again, students should only be submitting the application that they're specifically eligible for. You shouldn't be submitting both, because if you submit in an application that you're not eligible for, it will delay your awarding and could cause you to have to pay for things out of pocket until we are able to ensure which application you're eligible to submit. So if you know you're FAFSA eligible, only submit the FAFSA. And if you know that you're only CDA eligible, only submit the DREAM Act. Now, if you are a FAFSA applicant, these are the various forms of financial aid that we could potentially award you. Here at CSUF, when it comes to grants, there are federal grants like the Pell Grant, Federal Work Study, Teach Grant. When it comes to state grants, there's things like the Cal Grant, State University Grant, Middle Class Scholarship, all these things that can help pay for tuition and campus fees as well. And when we're looking at FAFSA applicants, we are also able to award students with federal loans, like the federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, as well as PLUS loans. And lastly, there are what we refer to as alternative loans, which are loans that students can apply through their whatever bank or credit institution that they're hoping to borrow loans from. And lastly, we always encourage students, whether they're FAFSA or CDA, to submit scholarship applications. The CSUF scholarship application is currently open. If you log on to your CSUF portal and on the student portal, in the little search bar, you type in scholarships, you'll be able to go directly to the scholarship portion or the scholarship application. We definitely encourage you to submit an application, because it's one of the ways that you can at least give yourself the greatest opportunity to get some free dollars that you don't have to repay. That isn't a loan. Additionally, if you are a FAFSA applicant, we're able to award you, if you're eligible, the Federal Work Study Grant, which is a type of award that allows students to work on campus to gain some really valuable work experience in different departments like financial aid, perhaps a department on campus like the orientation office that does campus tours, or many other departments on campus that are able to hire students, have them do different types of jobs in their departments, whether it's a front desk job, answering questions over the phone, via email, whatever type of support they need to get paid for that work and to still be a student here on campus. So it's a great opportunity to network and gain some valuable work experience. If you're interested in work study, one of the first things you can do is, when you're submitting a FAFSA, to indicate that yes, you are interested in being awarded the federal work study or to be considered for federal work study on the application. And then in terms of where you can find jobs, it would be through the university's Human Resources, Diversity and Inclusion website. There is a student employment portal, and this is where different departments will upload their student employment opportunities on there. And so everything from our Department of Financial Aid, when we do hire students, we'll post them on there, and when other departments are doing so as well, they will be posting them on there as well. Now, if you are a California DREAM Act applicant, these are the forms of financial aid that we could potentially award you. Everything from the Cal Grant, State University Grant, and Chafee Grant, which, as you'll see, these are all different forms of state funding. DREAM Act applicants are not eligible to receive any type of federal funding, whether it's a grant or a loan, but we are able to award students who are DREAM Act applicants state forms of financial aid like the ones listed here. Under the loans portion, we're able to award students DREAM loans, as well as authorize alternative loans or private loans. And as I mentioned earlier, we always encourage our students to submit scholarships applications, whether they're at CSUF, the CSU umbrella, or even outside organizations that are either nonprofits or just other scholarship granting institutions. And if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to get started on your application. I'll leave this on here for a few moments. Something you're able to do is either go onto a web browser and type in the URLs that you're seeing here, or you can take your phone, scan the QR code, and with your phone be taken straight to these application websites. Over the next few minutes, I'll be going over step-by-step instructions on what you can expect on the application by breaking down each section of the application. So if you haven't done so already, I'll give you a few moments to type in the URLs and get started with at least the application portion. And again, if you are a US citizen eligible non-citizen, you have a valid social security number, you should be submitting the FAFSA application. If you are a California resident and you meet AB 540 eligibility requirements, and typically this is our undocumented student population, you should be submitting the California DREAM Act application. All right, and if you're all ready, we'll get started with a few frequently asked questions just before we jump into the screenshots of what to expect. The first thing I'd want to go over is a question that asks, do I start a new application or renew my application? So we'll go over this in just a bit, but when you go on the either website, whether it's a FAFSA application or the DREAM Act application, you're going to be asked to select whether you are a new user or a returning user. And so if you are a first-time applicant, if this is your very first time submitting either the DREAM Act or the FAFSA, you should select start a new application. But if you are a returning applicant, which means that you have submitted a DREAM Act or a FAFSA in the past, you should click on renew or returning applicant. Next is, what documents will I be asked to provide on the 23-24 application? And the answer is the 2021 federal tax return. So not 2022, not 2020, only 2021. This is for the 23-24 FAFSA and DREAM Act. And lastly, how do I apply for federal work study? The first thing you can do is to select yes on the question that asks if you want to be considered for work study. Then we'll take your information later on the next few months and determine whether we can award you the award or not. And this is what the applications will look like, the home pages for each application. On one hand, we have the California DREAM Act application, which again will ask you to determine if you are a new returning user or provide a parent signature. We also have the FAFSA application, which will also allow you to select if you are a new applicant or a returning user of either application. Once you and we'll focus on both throughout these next few slides. When you click on the application, let's say you select that you are a new applicant for the DREAM Act, one of the first things you'll see is you'll be asked a series of questions that'll help determine whether or not you should be submitting the CDA. And the questions will ask you, do you meet these specific requirements? And those requirements will be things like listing what the AB 540 eligibility requirements are, if you have a social security number, and so forth. So make sure you go through and read those questions really carefully for the CDA applicants. For our FAFSA applicants and users, you'll be asked to indicate or to input your FSA ID, your password. If you don't have an FSA ID, you'll be asked to create one. And if you do have one, you'll keep reusing the one that you created in previous years. Once again, for our DREAM Act applicants, you're going to be asked a series of questions that'll help determine whether or not you should be submitting either the DREAM Act or the FAFSA, like the one that you're seeing on the screen here that says, do you have a social security number? And based on how you answer this question, you'll be asked a few different questions that'll help determine that. The questions will ask, did you obtain it through Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, otherwise known as DACA? Did you receive it? Do you meet AB 540 eligibility requirements, and so forth? So please be sure to read these carefully because it'll better guide you on the application process. For our FAFSA applicants, if you've never created an FSA ID, this is the time to do so. You'll be asked to get started on creating an FSA ID. You input all of your personal demographic information, everything from your name, date of birth, social security number, etc. And then you'll also create your username and your password. So this is, again, if you haven't created an FSA ID, you will need to do so in order to continue with the application process. And once you have done all of that, you've created an FSA ID, you've answered all the questions in the DREAM Act and created your own login as well, you can finally get started with the application itself. So on one hand, we have the California DREAM Act application, and you can see that you're asked to provide student demographic information. So everything from your name, date of birth, where you live, and other personal identifying information. And the same goes for our FAFSA applicants, everything from your address to your name, date of birth, and so forth. And next, after you have provided your personal demographic information, you'll be asked to include your school selection. And this is letting the application know, whether it's the DREAM Act or the FAFSA, what school you would like to receive your information. So The most important thing to do for our purposes is to make sure that you're indicating that you want Cal State Fullerton to receive your information, because if you don't include our school on your application, we'll never actually receive your information. So this is how they know what schools to send your FAFSA info to, your DREAM Act info to. Our federal school code is 001137. So you're welcome to write that down somewhere or take a picture of the screen here. Again, it's 001137. It's the fastest way to make sure that you are putting Cal State Fullerton, not any other Cal State or not any other college that might have a similar sounding name. It's not uncommon for us to see students perhaps selecting the wrong CSU or just another school that might have Fullerton in the name. So just make sure that you're inputting the correct number, 001137, to ensure that you are selecting Cal State Fullerton. Additionally, you're going to be asked to select your housing plan for the upcoming year. And this means that they want you to indicate where you plan to live for the 23-24 academic year. And your three options will be on campus with parents or off campus. So on campus would mean that you live in the residence halls at the university, with parents meaning that you would be living with a parent or guardian and commuting to campus, but still living with your family. Or off campus, meaning you are not living on campus, you're not living in a residence hall, you're not living with family, but perhaps you're living in an apartment by yourself or with roommates, but again, off campus, not on campus, and not with family. So you'll want to do your best to project where you'll be living next year if you're not entirely sure. And after you go through the demographic information, the school selection, you're going to go into the dependency portion of the application. And it's important to note that the application asks you a series of questions that will help determine whether or not you can be considered a dependent or an independent student. And so students under the age of 24 are automatically considered a dependent unless you can answer yes to any of the questions in a dependency question and the dependency section. And examples of these questions will be, are you married? Are you pursuing a master's or doctorate program? Are you an active duty or military veteran? Do you have children or dependents of your own? And so forth. There are several questions that you're going to be asked to click yes or no on. If you, and as well as when your date of birth is. If none of those apply to you, if they're all no to you, you will be a dependent student and you will be required, you must submit your parent demographic and financial information. But if one of those applies to you, perhaps you are married, perhaps you are a military veteran, then you will be considered an independent student and you will not be required to submit parent financial or demographic information. So it's something to keep in mind. Our office has to follow these requirements in order to determine dependency, as well as determine what information we sometimes have to verify, whether it's your information as a student or the parent information. So be sure to read those dependency questions carefully, because again, that will determine whether or not you need to provide parent financial and demographic information on your application. And so if you are a student that after going through all those questions, it was determined that you are a dependent student and you must provide parent demographic information and financial information, this is what the questions will look like for you. It'll ask you for your parents' marital status first and foremost. And so this is where it can sometimes get a little confusing for students, but I want you to know that both applications will have hints for you that'll help you determine what status is the most applicable to your family situation. Sometimes we have students whose parents are no longer married, perhaps they're remarried or they're divorced and separated. So please be sure to indicate which parent is your parent's marital status. If your parents are separated and you're a dependent student who lives with one parent or relies on just the one parent, you'll need to provide the parent demographic and financial information for the parent that provides the greatest amount of financial support for you. So it'll be whoever provides 51% of your support. Sometimes this is the parent that you might live with, but oftentimes it's just the parent who provides the greatest financial support for you. If your parents are separated and divorced, but have since remarried, you provide the parent that you live with or that you're dependent of, as well as their spouse. So the step parent. Again, it can get a little confusing, but please, you're welcome to read the hints on both applications to best determine which status is applicable. Then you'll go into providing their names, their date of birth, their social security number, as well as financial information. And it's also important to note that when you get to the financial portion, you'll have the option to do two things: to manually input all of the 2021 tax info, which means that you'll look at each line and you'll put what the wages are, what your adjusted gross income was, and so forth. But you're also if you're presented with the option to transfer your information by using the IRS data retrieval tool, I highly encourage you to do so. It will populate a lot of that information for you. If you're given the option to use that, please do. You'll be asked to just verify some information. I believe, from my own experience, I can tell you they'll ask you for your name, your social security information, your address, and some other information that you reported on your taxes. And then once they can verify that it's you, they'll transfer things like the adjusted gross income and income information from your taxes straight to the application, which will save you some time. But if you aren't able to do that, you can just manually input that information. And just as you're seeing on my screen, you will receive hints as to where you can look for that information. So if you're, for example, you're being asked to provide your adjusted gross income for 2021, it'll let you know which specific line of the 1040 tax return you can look at for that specific information. And once you've done all of that, you've provided your demographic information, your school selection, maybe even parent information, you can continue on to signing and submitting the application. And it's important to note that for both, signing is important, but you also need to click the submit button in order for it to be finalized. So make sure that you get to that portion and that you get your confirmation email that says that it's being processing and that your application has been submitted. If you are a dependent student, you will be required to provide a parent signature. And so if your parents are able to make an FSA ID for our FAFSA applicants, please be sure to have your parents create an FSA ID and sign electronically. It'll be the quickest way to submit their signature. DREAM Act applicants can have their parents sign online as well. If you are a student who perhaps comes from a mixed status family where perhaps your parents, where you may submit a FAFSA application, but your parents are not able to create an FSA ID because they don't have a social security number, because that is a requirement for the FSA ID. What you can do is print out the signature page, type in zeros on the portion of the application that asks you for parent information, and then mail that signature page directly to FAFSA. So again, for those of you whose parents are unable to sign electronically because they do not have a social security number, make sure that your parents type in zeros on the question that asks for social security information for the parent, and then print out the signature page, have them sign by hand, and mail it straight to them. Snail mail, so envelope stamp off on the post office route. And that way your parents can have their signature processed. And this is just some information on the parent signature. You'll have the address listed on the bottom of the parent signature, so no need to take a picture of this information here, but this is an example of what it'll look like. And before you go, because we're close to finishing our slideshow here, just want to go over a few pieces of information that are really important. And the first question is, when is the priority deadline for both the CDA and the FAFSA? And again, it's really important to note that it's March 2nd. So we're really close to that deadline. We're just a few weeks away. And again, it's important to be a priority applicant because that allows you to be considered for the maximum amount of financial aid possible. The next question is, should students submit both the CDA and the FAFSA application? And the answer is no. Students should only be submitting whichever application they are specifically eligible to submit. So only the DREAM Act or only the FAFSA. Next is, what tax information will be used for the 23-24 CDA and FAFSA? And the answer is your 2021 federal tax return. So if you are submitting a FAFSA or a DREAM Act today, please know that you're only going to be asked to provide 2021 federal tax return information, not 2020 or 2022. And additionally, we want to encourage students to keep applying each and every year that they're attending CSUF. So everything that we do in financial aid, I would say, is very cyclical. It's going to be repeating itself until you graduate. So each year the application will open up on October 1st, and you want to submit it by March 2nd of 2023. And that's again for the DREAM Act and the FAFSA. They open up on the same day, and they have the same priority deadline. And then after you submit your FAFSA application, you want to routinely check your student center, your student homepage, and view your tasks or your to-do list in the spring semester, so that we can ensure that if there are any documents that we're requesting from you, they will appear on there, and so that you can go ahead and submit them. The priority deadline will typically be in late April, and for this year, it's specifically going to be April 27th. To submit any documents that are pending. So if you are a student that in the next few weeks and months are asked to submit any additional documents, whether it's a tax document, a household size document, or any other verification item from our office, from the Office of Financial Aid, to please submit it by the specific priority deadline that you see listed, which should be April 27th. And then once you do all of that, you submit your application, you submit your documents, if you're asked for any to submit any, we will be able to review your eligibility information and award you in the summer. So this happens every year again, and you want to keep doing this until you graduate. And then I also wanted to list a few pieces of websites and just resources for you all to keep in mind. The federal student aid website is studentaid.gov. This is where you can go to complete your FAFSA application, to get information on loans, on anything else that has to do with federal student aid programs. The California Student Aid Commission is the state agency, and that's their website there that awards the Cal Grant, the Middle Class Scholarship, Chafee, and that also administers the California Dream Act as listed here below. So I'll leave this up here for a few moments in case you'd like to take a picture as well. And then I just want to list our contact information here for you all. We are open Monday through Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. We are open from 8 to 6 virtually. And on Wednesday from 12:30 to 6, and on Fridays from 8 to 5. And then in person, we're open Monday through Friday as well, 8 to 5, with the exception of Wednesday when it is 12:30 to 5. All of our contact info is available online. We encourage you to contact us by either calling us, coming in person to visit our office, submitting an online question. When you go on our contact us page, at the very top, you'll see a portion that'll say submit your question or financially questions. We are able to meet with students via phone, via Zoom. So if you're not able to come in person and you want to create a counseling appointment, we'd be happy to do so virtually. And then also we encourage you to follow us on Instagram. We do our best to be active and to post information that's relevant, that's helpful, that's important, and it isn't just additional filler on your timeline. So I encourage you to follow us as well as follow the TAP Center.